If you were a gamer in the late 2000s, you almost certainly remember a game called Spore. The anticipation was huge. It promised to be a one-of-a-kind simulation game that allowed the player to take the role of a god who develops their own species and watches it exponentially grow and evolve. And it was led by Will Wright, no less, lead designer of SimCity and The Sims. Whether you think Spore lived up to the hype or not is a matter of opinion, but by far the biggest criticism of Spore actually had nothing to do with the game at all. It was all about its use of Spore and DRM. Spore is a topic for a whole other video, but long story short, EA caught not one, not two, but 3 lawsuits over the DRM. And despite hoping Spore would curb piracy, Spore ended up getting cracked anyway, and became one of the most pirated games of the year out of protest. But if you thought this DRM debacle taught EA anything long term, you would be sorely mistaken. Despite the controversy, Spore was still commercially successful, and EA produced a number of spin-offs over the next 2 years for the Nintendo DS, the Wii, the iPhone, and Facebook, until finally in 2011 they made a game that wasn't trying to be a sequel or a spin-off. It was called Darkspore, and to be honest, I'd never heard of it before. It's effectively a completely different game. It borrowed the advanced creature editor from Spore, but is otherwise more of a Diablo-esque action RPG than any kind of simulation strategy game. Despite the departure from the original gameplay of Spore and releasing to somewhat mixed reviews from critics, it did end up finding its fans. Was it actually any good? Well, unfortunately, we have to trust them on that. You see, Darkspore required a persistent internet connection. Even in single player mode, the game could only run if it had access to EA's servers, and those servers only lasted 5 years before they were shut down in 2016. The game has been completely unplayable ever since. To the dismay of its loyal fans, no one in the community was able to save it. Often, when the plug is pulled on a popular game, there's at least some push to capture packets for later analysis and reverse engineering, but no such thing seemed to happen for Darkspore. Maybe it was just unlucky and none of its players had the knowledge or time to pull it off. Maybe people feared the infamously litigious EA when it comes to fan projects. Whatever the reason, Darkspore became lost to time. A footnote on the history of Spore, a forgotten piece of gaming history. Well, almost forgotten. For the last few years, a team of community devs has been working tirelessly to resurrect Darkspore and make it fully playable once again. But despite making a lot of impressive progress, they still have a lot of work ahead of them. We'll get into all of that and more after a message from our sponsor. If you're in need of a VPN, check out Surfshark VPN. You may have noticed that websites are often tailored for your location. This is because your IP address gives them a rough idea of where you are. Occasionally, this can be useful, but it can also cause a lot of problems. I'm sure we've all seen a message like this: some video we want to watch is not available in our country. With Surfshark VPN, you can change your IP address so the internet thinks you're somewhere else and allows you to watch that content you were blocked from. Have you ever noticed that certain things are more expensive in some places than others? Anything from flights to subscription costs can vary wildly from place to place. But with Surfshark VPN, just one click gets you access to much fairer prices. It's like it pays for itself. Some governments are adopting more and more censorship of the internet, but with Surfshark VPN, you can relay your traffic through a country that doesn't censor those things, giving you full access to the internet again. Surfshark VPN offers you access to 3,200 servers in 100 countries on an unlimited number of devices, and if you don't like it, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. In fact, if you go to surfshark.com/MattKC, you get 4 extra months for free. So what are you waiting for? Check out Surfshark today to get the most out of your internet connection. And now back to Darkspore. When Darkspore was released in 2011, a Spore fan by the name of VitorMM began studying computer science at university, moving in with his grandmother who happened to live much closer to the university than his parents. But an unfortunate side effect of this was that his grandmother had no internet. The prospect of this new, darker spin-off of a game he really liked sounded intriguing, but with no internet connection there was simply no way for him to play it. Fast forward to 2018 and Vitor's time in university was coming to an end. He had just started making an income and used it to start paying for an internet connection in his grandmother's house. He soon realized that this meant he could finally try Darkspore, the game he had previously wanted to play but had been forced to skip. There was just one problem. Darkspore was already dead. Immediately, he began researching if there were any attempts at recreating the servers to make the game playable again, but there was nothing tangible. The closest he could find was threads of people talking about it, and rather annoyingly, a lot of replies claiming that doing so for Darkspore would be impossible. About to finish his computer science degree, he figured he might as well get some use out of it, and decided to take matters into his own hands. Yes, the first community Darkspore server project was being led by someone who had never played the game, never even had a chance to. But ironically, that was the biggest motivating factor for doing it. so that all of the people who are in the same boat as him could finally get a chance to experience it. But how is this even possible? How could someone recreate the servers with no preserved packet data and no personal experience of how the game was even supposed to play? Indeed, Vitor did scour the internet for any packet captures, but there seemed to be none out there. But there is another way to mostly figure out what a server needs to do, and it's by diving deep into the client game code to see what data it sends and what it expects in return. This is generally a much more challenging process. Packet captures reveal a lot about how the server responds to specific situations. You can get pretty far just making your server respond in the same ways that the original did. But without any documentation or evidence of how the original worked, you have to make a lot more trial and error guesses based off of whatever you can find through classical reverse engineering. It's worth mentioning that at this point the community's favorite reverse engineering tool, Ghidra, didn't even exist yet, and IDA's free version was even more limited than it is today. Luckily he had access to IDA Pro, but if you know anything about IDA Pro, you know it's not cheap. But he didn't let any of this discourage him, and he began his work recreating EA servers in Python. While initially it was just Vitor, he soon got the help of another developer by the name of Splitwirez, an expert on Darkspore who also came up with a name for their new server, Resurrection Capsule, referring to an in-game item that revives a dead hero in your squad. Seeing as they were reviving the whole game, this felt fitting, though ultimately everyone just called it Recap for short. The two of them made progress, along with the help of a dedicated community on Discord, but unfortunately, shortly afterwards, Vitor ended up having to step away to focus on finishing his university course. When he returned to the scene, he was surprised to discover that a different developer by the name of Dalcon had completely rewritten their code into C++ and was making great progress with it. Rather than split their efforts, they decided to merge the two projects, with the official Recap project rebasing on Dalcon's C++ code. For a while, Dalcon seemed unstoppable. While he and Vitor would work in parallel, Dalcon would frequently make huge leaps of progress that outpaced Vitor's own work. This had pros and cons. Through this, Dalcon was eventually able to get Darkspore in-game, which was obviously exciting, but it also meant Vitor as the project leader had trouble keeping up with reviewing Dalcon's work and resolving merge conflicts that arose between their contributions. Vitor eventually burned out and had to take a break from the project, but ironically at the same time, Dalcon became busy in his real life and ended up completely disappearing. This was a problem, not just because progress ground to a halt just as it had reached its first major milestone, but also because Dalcon had become a pretty critical part of the Recap team. You ever hear of something called the bus factor, as in how well can a project survive if certain team members get hit by a bus tomorrow? Well, this ended up being a big problem when Dalcon disappeared. Dalcon had written tools for things like processing Darkspore's proprietary game formats. However, he'd never gotten around to sharing the source code for them before he disappeared. The team only had a few builds, and for some reason, none of them seemed to work on anyone else's machine. It would always just throw some vague error message. Dalcon had also inadvertently left Recop in an unbuildable state on Linux, the OS most commonly used for servers like this. Being predominantly a Windows user, in his haste he had incorporated a few Windows-only libraries that would now have to be untangled and swapped out for the server to be cross-platform. It was hard to complain too much because he had made so much progress that naturally no one wanted to throw out, but it would take some time to pick up the pieces and start making progress again. Thankfully, once again, Vitor wasn't alone in doing so. Developers JeanxPereira and R0Pointer joined the team, with R0Pointer working to get the server code building properly again, and Jean examining Dalcon's game format tools. Sadly, with no source code and no way to contact Dalcon, the only option as far as trying to get it working was to try reverse engineering the tool with x64 debug. Ultimately, he decided it would be easier to just rewrite the whole thing from scratch. While this undoubtedly set them back a little, it ended up being the right move long term. Now they had not only a much more complete understanding of the game's formats, they could also extend their new tool with additional features that the old tool never had. They could even use the knowledge they had gained to add support for other proprietary formats the game had. With the current team, progress is once again underway and it's been smooth sailing ever since. But the project still has a lot of work ahead of it. Many crucial gameplay mechanics like enemy AI, item drops, and player damage were all processed on the server, and the client has no hints as to how exactly they should be calculated. All they can do is make educated guesses and continue to trial and error it. It's kind of a fascinating process of archaeology. Although like researching cavemen and dinosaurs, we only have sparse, incomplete evidence for how exactly it all worked back then. But it's inspiring to see people try to resurrect something that otherwise would be completely lost to time. It's even resulted in discovering parts of the game that no one was aware of before, like these debug menus. No one had ever seen these before, and the Recap team hadn't intended to find them, but it just goes to show what you can discover if you start digging beneath the surface. While the game is by no means fully playable with the current state of the server, it can launch and even get into some of the game's missions. When you consider how little they're working with, it's seriously impressive work. They've also had to recreate parts of the game that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like web pages that were displayed in the game's various web views. Some of them are embedded into the client so they still work fine, but many were generated by the server and now have to be recreated from scratch, with the only available reference being old YouTube videos they have to scour through, hoping someone at some point shows the one they're looking for. These web views are so old, even IE11 looks down on them. But Vitor says it's actually been fun trying to find the sweet spot of what looks right versus what the game's web views support. Hopefully in the not too distant future, Darkspore will be fully playable again, but it could definitely use some help getting there. All of their work is fully open source, and they encourage anyone who's interested and has C++ and reverse engineering skills to join the team. Or if you somehow do have packet captures from Darkspore, they would love to hear from you. And of course, even if you don't have time to contribute, anyone who is able to test the current server and report bugs back to the team is welcome to do so, keeping in mind that it's a hobby project, so try not to overwhelm them. Huge thanks to recap developers VitorMM, JeanxPereira, R0Pointer, and Splitwirez for talking to us, and thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.